Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rockets' red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
Our thanks to Melissa Salazar-Hamilton with HBD and, of course, HFD Honor Guard. You can all be seated. Thank you so much. Okay. I've never been on stage for a presentation of colors, so I was looking around going, oh boy, which way do I turn? All right, thank you everyone for that. Before we start, I want to first explain how this will work. Each of you that are being honored today was given an index card at check-in. When your department coordinator tells you, directors and honorees, you will take that card and your certificate, if you choose, and line up to my right. Department directors will be first to come to the stage, followed by each employee one by one. When you come up on stage, you will stop, hand me your index card. Then after I take that card from you, you'll proceed to the left side of the stage here and stand between Mayor Turner and your department director for your picture. After your photo, you'll exit the stage and return to your seat. And if there's a special way I can say your last name, let me know. I usually say Hernandez, but if your name is Hernandez and you want to say Hernandez, I can do that too, whatever you want. Let's get started this morning. We will start with the Houston Fire Department. All right, next up is Mark Cummings, Houston Fire Department, 35 years. Okay, next up is Department of Neighborhoods, starting off with Director Takasha Francis. And we have Stephanie C. Mingo, Department of Neighborhoods for 35 years. All right, Yvonne M. Lagerman, 30 years of finance. Okay, on to Houston Public Works. Okay, standing in for the Director of Houston Public Works, we have Eric Dargan, the Chief Operating Officer. Getting ahead of myself slightly. All right, let's welcome up Demita A. Daniels, 35 years of service. Next up is Joyce Wilson, 30 years. Miranda K. Horton, 30 years. Next up is Cynthia Cerda Perez, 30 years. All right, 35 years of service, Sunny Doe. Alice Guidry, 30 years. Next up is VJ Chef, 30 years. Michelle Thalis, 30 years. Now we have Anthony W. Sims, 35 years. Frank Eugene Lee, 30 years. Tony Duck Boo, 35 years. Godwin Okoro, 30 years. Next up, we have Jesus Gonzalez, 30 years. Emmanuel Onwali, 30 years. Dudley Hall, 35 years. We have an honoree with HFD, Bob Schleter, 35 years. Round of applause for him. Okay, let's move on to Human Resources. Jane Cheeks here, the director, with Marilyn Owens, 30 years. Next up is Administration and Regulatory Affairs. Frank Carmody standing in for the director with Robin Wolf, 30 years. Up next is Paulette Pastor, 35 years. Okay, on to Fleet Management with Victor Ayers, Director with Max Milstead, 40 years on the job. Up next is Peter Nguyen, 35 years. Next we have Lester Shannon, 35 years. Up next is Larry Richard Hunter, 35 years. Okay, next up is the Houston Health Department, Stephen L. Williams, Director, along with Angela Canty, 35 years. Next up is Rutha Renee Williams, 35 years. Next is Luther Harrell, 30 years. Next in line here is Daryl S. Tate, 30 years with the Houston Health Department. Next up, we have Manuel Perez, 30 years. Next up is Annette L. Sanders, 30 years. Valda J. Spence is up next, 30 years. All right, next up we're going to get to Houston Airport Systems. Standing in for Director, we have Harleen Smith, the Chief Human Resource Officer, and Frederick Hambrick, 35 years. I'm sorry, Cesar Guzman Ganda is next. Apologize for that one. Okay. So we want to do this right now? Yes. Next up, some special recognition for the Director of Municipal Courts, Joyce Elaine Marshall. Gregory Pryor, 30 years. Up next is Joycelyn D. Johnson, 30 years. Next up, I think I'm officially the shortest woman in the room. This is the tallest man. Robert Thomas, 30 years on the job. Sadaya Person, 30 years. Cynthia Ann Hall, 30 years. Linda Levo, 30 years. Velda Cook, 30 years. Lovey Dorsey, 30 years. Melba Jean King, 35 years. Moving on to Houston Parks and Recreation, we have Steve Wright, Director, along with Velma Wood, 30 years. Larry Wayne Chenier, 35 years. Up next, Anastasio Martinez, 35 years. Up next, Joe Luis Jerez, 35 years. Joseph Matten Perucci, 40 years. Nice. All right, here we go on to Solid Waste Management. Harry Hayes, Director, with Elise Coffey Scott, 30 years. Up next, Fidel Arias, 35 years. Up next, we have Hiram Nimmons, 35 years. And they're calling him Hollywood. Feel like that should have been on the card. Up next, we have Michelle Jones, 40 years. All right, on to Office of Business Opportunity, Carlisia Wright, Director, with Patsy Jackson, 40 years. On to the Houston Public Library. Standing in for the director is Elizabeth Sargent, along with Alice Dooley, 40 years on the job. Congratulations. Now we have Houston Police Department standing in for Chief Acevedo, Executive Assistant Chief Troy Finner, along with Alan Watson, 35 years. Next up, we have Bernard Simeon, 30 years. Grace Conti, 30 years. Next up, Patricia Burt, 30 years. Next up, Elizabeth T., 35 years. Next up, Lauren Jaskolka, 35 years. Next up, Pedro Alegría, 35 years. On to Stephen Kwiatkowski, 35 years. Now it's on to Rachel Shannon, 35 years. Ellen Lopez, 35 years. Next we have Johnny Moreno, 35 years. Frank Escobedo, 40 years. 40 years on the job, my goodness. Donald Kulak, 40 years. Ray Gonzalez, 40 years. Samuel Roccaforte, 40 years. Charlotte Kelly, 35 years. Last but not least, Glenn Yorick, 40 years. All right, thank you, Mayor. Thank you. Round of applause for Mayor Turner. He's going to the airport. Thank you for being here, sir. He extended his time a little bit. I'm glad we made it through. Congratulations to everybody. We're going to get on to lunch right now.